Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting new Ascendancy, which is the Lich. Now the Lich is the third Witch Ascendancy alongside the Infernalist and the Blood Mage. And I gotta honestly tell you, both of those are quite interesting. Not every class can say that of itself, so yeah, heads up to them. We have self-damage, we have low life potentially in the future. Self-damage was played quite a bit. With Barrier Invocation and stuff like that. We had a lot of minion builds, very good on Infernalist. Now, Blood Mage had a little bit of a rough start because a lot of people thought it was a league start Ascendancy. Sanguimancy kind of went a little bit against that. It redeemed itself in the end, but with two pretty nice Ascendancies, how about we add a third one? But before we get into Lich, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is an online learning platform that teaches you backend development with tactics learned from game design. This makes it way easier to motivate people to actually learn code, and you also get better at it while having fun. Programmers also have amazing earning potential. In fact, the median salary for backend development in the US in 2023 was $100,000. The platform is designed to get you to actually start coding, because that's just the only way to learn. They'll teach you backend development from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages. You can earn XP, levels, achievements, complete quests, and also possibly get a spot on the leaderboards. So if you're interested, use code Palsteron for 25% off your first purchase. That is either a month or a year, whatever you prefer. Link will be down below in the description. But with that being said, let's get back to the video. Now, this Ascendancy works both for Chaos Casters, minions, a few other things in between. I will not be talking about minions specifically. Gazzy already made a video about it. I'm not very knowledgeable about minions in PoE 2. And I'll link his video down below in the description if you're interested in that. However, I have heard a lot of people talk about this Ascendancy, and for now, the biggest draw here was Eternal Life. Your life cannot change while you have Energy Shield. We're going to go to that in a second, but I quickly want to shout out Soulless form, which I think is truly underrated because of the second line right here. Now, if you look at this Ascendancy as a whole, you would assume it's somewhere like, oh, mana stacking, right? Like Unholy Might, maybe Energy Shield, right? There's a few Energy Shield adjacent nodes, but nobody really thinks about like the application of just a normal everyday build. Let's assume a build with 3,000 life and like 1,500 int. What does this node actually do? And by the way, I'm not saying you can't also stack Energy Shield, but it's just kind of interesting to look into. So let's say you have 3,000 life and 1,500 mana. What this says is no inherent mana regeneration. Regenerate mana equal to 6% of maximum life per second. Now, usually, in case you don't know, you have 4% of mana regenerated per second, which is removed, right? Like this doesn't exist anymore. Instead, your base gets taken over by 6% of life regenerated per second. Now, as this example, 4% of 3,000, you would get 60 base regen. That is before any percentages, right? So obviously, you know, you can juice that up quite a bit. But if you went for a like non-mana stacker, normal build, normal builds have mana problems all the time, right? Like, obviously, one of the payoffs of going mana stacker is that mana is less and less of an issue because your spells cost less relatively to how much mana you have. But on a normal build, like, every attack costs like 300, you have 1,500 mana. Mana regen is pretty premium. So, for those builds, you will now, instead, not take the 1.5, you will take the 3,000 life as your minimum, and you get 6% life regenerated per second. That is an increase from 60 base regen to 180. And even if you go to the left side and you take lose 5% mana per second, for we're going to talk about that in a second, you would still be almost double of what you usually are on a mana character. So this first node here, while a lot of people are talking about other implications, I'll go through all that. You probably have already seen it. This node alone, unless I'm misunderstanding it, will literally just triple your mana regen. On this example, the less life and the more mana you have, obviously the worse this transaction gets. But even if you have 3,000 life and 3,000 mana, it would still go from 4 to 6. Now, some people have said this would imply that percentage mana regen doesn't work. Personally, I don't really think that's true because all it says is your inherent mana regeneration is gone. If this would count for all mana regen, this also says mana, right? It's the same wording. So percentage mana regeneration from something like jewelry should still multiply your new base of 180. And mana in PoE 2 is not a joke. People are doing some crazy things just to not have mana issues and mana struggles. And some actually have to tone down their attack speed or cast speed so that they actually have a comfy playstyle. This could be absolutely huge. If I had a note like an Ascendancy that just said alleviate mana, I'd probably take it on every single Ascendancy I could get. Unless I had a way to cheese it, obviously. But, okay. There's also 10% of damage taken bypasses Energy Shield. Now, we go down here to Eternal Life. Your life cannot change while you have Energy Shield. So if you take damage, let's say 100 incoming damage, 90 of that actually gets realized on the Energy Shield, and 10% of that goes through, but your life can't change. So that transaction never happens. Now, to Eternal Life, I have 3 things to say. The first one is some people talked about one-shot protection, right? Because they were basically saying if you take 1,000 damage, right, and you just have 1 Energy Shield, since that is 1 damage instance, maybe you only take 1 damage. That's, I mean, I think that I don't have to explain to you that that is not the case. And if PoE2 was mistakenly coded like that, then it will not be whenever the game goes out or a few hours into when the patch starts. So I'm not even going to really talk about that. The second thing is, can you use this with blood magic? So the idea is you pay your mana with your life, but your life can't change. So can you still do that? And the answer, in my opinion, is no. Usually when something says it costs something and you cannot pay that, then you will just not be able to cast. So I would assume that if you take blood magic on this Ascendancy, that it would be, your skill would straight up be grayed out and you couldn't even press it. Could be wrong, but that is, I'm just gonna give my 2 cents to that. I cannot see how that would ever work. There was also a few other talks about sacrificing life. I also don't think that works at all, because if you don't sacrifice the life, if the life doesn't get realized, then you're also not gonna get a bonus relative to that. You could probably still use it. So for example, the gloves, like Demon Stitcher, sacrifice percentage of life to gain that much energy shield when you cast a spell. I think it would technically resolve, but since you're not actually sacrificing any value, you would not get any energy shield back. So I don't think that you would just gain 15% of your life as energy shield whenever you cast something. And the last point here, Adziri's Disdain and Blacked Out. Now, Adziri's Disdain has the exact same wording as Lich. Damage taken bypasses energy shield. You can get this to 31% with a corruption, and then you could add that to the 10%, could say 41% damage reduction. A lot of people are talking about it. I personally feel like this is just them saying Adziri's Disdain is going to get it, well, nerfed. Destroyed, nerfed, whatever you want to say. And the reason I think that is, it was already good. Right? Like, it's not like it could just fall through the cracks. This helmet was played heavily. It was an absolute powerhouse last league. So even without Lich, it probably would have gotten adjusted. But now they're definitely taking a closer look at it. And the other interesting one is Blacked Out, which says damage over time bypasses your energy shield, which would mean that you don't take any damage over time. It only has 80 or so energy shield, so I'm not 100% sure how strong that would be versus, for example, an energy shield base. It also comes with a downside while not on full life, sacrifice mana per second. All these things could be quite annoying. I want to tell you though that there could be some cheese where maybe there's like a very specialized character that only does one scenario of like one league mechanic, and that league mechanic has like a dot that you always die to, and that's the only way you can die. So I wouldn't rule this out completely. I actually think this is very cheesy and could find a home. Now then we have non-channeling spells consume power charges, deal 25% more damage. If you have a power charge to whatever you're casting, more damage multiplier. More damage multipliers aren't that easy to get. However, this is pretty situational. You could do something with Combat Frenzy or the like. This is something we'll have to see for the patch notes, because this would tell me 25% more damage is good, but right now it would be pretty annoying to do this. So this tells me maybe it's a little bit easier. Small shout out to the small note here as well. 30% increased energy shield if you've consumed the power charge recently, which is in the last 4 seconds. That is a lot easier to do. And it's a 30% instead of a 20%. So a very efficient small point. Then let's talk about what I thought would be the least controversial note, but turns out it has a wide array of opinions. And that is the Crystalline Phylactery. Can socket one non-unique basic jewel. Non-unique basic jewel, as far as I know, doesn't really mean much in the game right now, because there are only basic jewels, which is Sapphire, Ruby, and Emerald. And then actually prismatic jewels don't count, right? For example, 100% increased effect of socketed jewel, which means you get an extra socket and then you can put a jewel in there and that one gets doubled. And then 50% more mana cost if you have energy shield. If you have no energy shield, sorry. Now, as far as I know, you can't really, on this character, you're probably not going to have no energy shield at any point. If you do, it's maybe a little bit annoying. But I just want to point out that I don't think currently there's any upside to this ever, like where something deals damage according to your mana cost. At least nothing that I have on my radar, but that might come in the future, maybe with this patch, so that's something to look out for. And the other thing I want to point out, because some people have said this is pretty mediocre, so you're getting a jewel socket, and that gets doubled. So you might assume, oh, it's like getting 2 extra jewel sockets, which you're technically correct. The important point, though, is you're getting the best jewel that you have times 2. So if you think about your build, usually somewhere you have a good jewel, maybe even a broken jewel, right? Like maybe, I don't know, you have like 3 4-stat jewels, you corrupted. Obviously, this gets worse on SSF, I'm not saying that. But on trade, you got lucky somewhere, and you got like an implicit, or you got a 5th mod that's actually usable. And all of a sudden, you have a jewel that's a lot stronger than almost all the other ones you have. So when you say it's like 2 jewels, then you would think, oh, it's just like getting, like putting your last points into 2 jewel sockets. But it's not, because these are going to be your worst jewels, because you add them at the end. And this is going to be like if you mirrored your best jewel and then put that in there, right? So it's like 2 jewels, but it's your best jewel. For example, you can have an implicit with resistant or intelligence, which, as far as I know, still doubles. I don't think basic jewel has anything to do with like corruption, so it should work. You get a corruption, and then you get up to 4 modifiers, and they all get duplicated. I put the 20% energy shield from the pathing node, which is quite efficient, in here as well. So for example, if you had a jewel, a normal jewel with percentage ES, I just took cold damage as an example, cold caster, whatever, you can interchange this, depends on what you want to do. You can also put an emerald in there and actually get 4% movement speed, all the good stuff. Crit multi for spells in the suffix, that would be probably your best jewel, right? And you would get 20 and 58% ES, 36 cold damage, crit multi. And while sure, you could say this is not a multiplier, this is a ton of stats. So a wide array of different stats that you can exactly pinpoint. You can say, this is what I want. Obviously, it gets a lot more interesting with special mods. For example, if you have a jewel that gives you damage is taken from mana before life, it gets a lot easier to do that. Or you have something like meta skills gain increased energy. Often you have to reach very high break points. So I'm just saying there is a ton of applications where this is not just okay, but it's actually better than okay. And on top of that, PoE 2 Ascendancies are not that strong in general on average, so it's not like this is up against PoE 1 Ascendancies. This node, I think, I would be highly surprised if most people will not use this at some point. Maybe if they need 2 4-pointers, sure, but I think this will be on most endgame Liches, at least on trade. So we have one more 2-pointer here before we get onto the left side, which is Eldritch Empowerment. Non-channeling spells cost an additional 3% of max ES. Non-channeling spells deal 30% more damage. Big upside. And then you have the note here, spending energy shield does not interrupt recharge. I didn't even know that was the case before reading this, but apparently that is usually the case in PoE 2. However, now you can just spam away. There, I really thought this was OP because I was thinking if you play on a character that doesn't necessarily care about ES that much, right? You just like what I said earlier, your normal build with life, with mana, maybe a little bit of ES. This 3% is not going to do much. But the issue is it's a cost, which means that if you don't have the energy shield, you can't even cast your spell, right? So this little itty bit on top of your mana cost will gray out your skill and you just cannot cast it. It's not like you sacrifice the ES whenever you cast. That would be meaningless. You have a cost. And if you can't pay the cost, you can't cast the whole spell. So a lot of people were thinking at first, oh, you just don't get the 30% more damage if you can't fulfill this. But no, you will straight up not be able to cast your spell, which is a little bit annoying. So not 100% sure I'm willing to commit to this, but in theory, if you can keep it up constantly, that is pretty strong. Now, there are a few notes that I've made regarding this, mainly notes that would hinder your enemy of chunking your whole ES away, saying that you're, for example, a hybrid build, right? So Eternal Youth and Zealot's Oath would be 2 of those. Eternal Youth means that you can just spam your life flask to get ES, which would give you a steady recharge. You wouldn't have to ever wait for recharge, even if enemies jump on top of you. So you'd probably always be able to spam your skills because of decent regen. I don't even know if you would need to take any life flask notes for that at all. And the other one, also interesting, Zealot's Oath. Excess life recovery from regeneration is applied to energy shield. So if you're a hybrid build and you're topped up, then your energy shield still keeps pumping. So for example, if you have a ton of regen and like 4,000 life, but only like 1,000 ES, then that regen that you get percentage-wise from the life is going to be bombastic on the ES. So that should also make it so that never happens. And the third one is Ghost Dance, which if you're somehow able to squeeze evasion in, will also be able to, whenever you get jumped at, recover some of your S based on your evasion. But in general, I think this node is extremely powerful. 30% more damage for an Ascendancy is way above average for PoE 2. So I would look out for this and try to find solutions to it if you can. Now then, let's get to the left side. And just a quickie reminder here, these are actually interchanged. So apparently they put them incorrectly, like the labels. Obviously, the two Unholy Might related nodes are next to each other, like here, and vice versa for the other nodes that are curse related. So let's start with the curse related ones. We have Rupture the Soul. Cursed enemies killed by you or your allies in your presence have 30% chance to explode. Quarter of your chaos. So this is very reminiscent of the Occultist in Path of Exile 1. There are a few issues with this. The first one is in the trailer, we actually saw how these explosions look like. All right, I found the clip, so this has to be the Explodey. I put it on 0.25. We're watching a Chaos Dot build, so it's going to take a long time for the enemies to die, wink wink. But you will see the explosions right here, and I'll pause it at the right time. So they are not that big. That's what she said, but look at this. So if you remember PoE 1, you could see that the explosions are kind of bombastic. These are not bad, but if you compare them to, for example, the Mercenary, they're probably like half of the size. And this is not the end of the world, but the other problem is if you look at cursed enemies killed by your allies, they have to be cursed, which first up means you have to run Blasphemy. But even if you're a Hex Blast build, and that's, for example, that's already in the build, that's an issue because your Blasphemy is probably going to be like this big, so you're never going to get chains, right? Because at some point the chain will stop because the enemies go out of your Blasphemy. So I'm not really sure if you're ever going to have a quality explosion build like you would have in Path of Exile 1 just to like temper your expectations. I don't think this node is bad at all. It also removes corpses and stuff in that from the ground. Do note though that if you're not playing Hex Blast, this means you have to play Blasphemy. I will say, once again, if you're a minion build, you have a lot more time. I agree with Gazi on this. You have a lot more time to actually cast your curses, and then this node gets a lot better. But on a self-cast build without Blasphemy, I would personally not consider this all that good. And the reason I'm saying this is that Blasphemy has 60 spirit cost per curse, although with quality it's only 55. That is still a quite big commitment. So you have to take Rupture the Soul to get to the next node, which is Dominion over Flesh, which gives you an additional curse and basically means that hexproof enemies are irrelevant, like they can still get cursed, or at least affected by the curse. And in between, you have 25% increased effect of curses, which is very strong. And I mean, very strong. I shouldn't say very strong, but it's a very nice effect if you're already into that. How good is this mod? It's okay. I haven't really thought about it too much, to be completely honest, but the additional curse is kind of mid. So these are currently all the curses in the game, and you'll see that, for example, Elemental Weakness is missing here. So every element really only has 1 damage aura. Same goes for stuff like Despair, Temporal Chains, all of the good stuff. I think this still works for Poison and Ailments, correct me if I'm wrong. So I guess you could count Temporal Chains. But then there's 2 defensive ones, which is Temporal Chains and Enfeeble. The problem mainly is how do you apply them? There's no curse on hit in PoE. So let's say you want 2 curses. You're probably not going to go for that Ascendancy. You're probably going to go for Whispers of Doom. I know the downside, but that's not as big of a deal, especially with Cursed Ground, which already removes all these issues, right? So the third curse is going to be quite hard to apply. And let's say you go Blasphemy. Are you really going to pay, what, 55 times Free Spirit? 165 Spirit for 3 curses. They all get 40% less effect. I really don't think so. And are you going to hardcast all of them? Maybe on a minion build. But even then, I would argue our defensive curses, which you would have to use 2 if you have free curses, would that really be good in a defensive scenario? Like, are you going to have time in response to somebody to cast that Temporal Chains or cast that Enfeeble? Maybe against bosses, but I'd be doubtful, especially because this Ascendancy is just absolutely stacked. But yeah, I guess you can keep the +1 curse in mind. And the last theme of this is Unholy Might. You can see on the bottom here, Unholy Might is a buff that grants 30% of all damage as extra chaos damage. So akin to something you would see on a wand, you always see of damage as extra lightning, as extra cold. This is as extra chaos, and 30% is quite a bit. Do note that this is additive with other effects like that. So for example, if you had something similar to a Ming's Heart, Ming's has the same wording. Percentage of damage is extra chaos damage, so it would not be just 30% more damage, unless this is the only way you get that effect. And the way you get Unholy Might is with Necromantic Conduit, which is a 2-pointer, which gives you and your allies Unholy Might while you're not on low mana. Lose 5% of mana per second, which if you are, for example, a life build, and you took these nodes right here, as I talked about earlier, you're going to have a ton of mana regen and you're going to easily work against that. If you don't, and you're like an ES-based build, maybe like a mom kind of type, which you might be if you take the next node, then this might be actually a pretty rough downside. But then there's the second node, which is Blackened Heart. 4% increased magnitude of Unholy Might buffs you grant per 100 max mana. So that would mean, for example, for a mana stacker, like let's say we don't go overboard, if you had 5,000, let's just say 50 times 4, right? You all know that's going to be 200% of Unholy Might effect. So that would mean you get an extra 60% here on top of everything. And that is, I would say, decent. Once again, that's not 60% more damage. That is added on top of the same multiplier. So for example, if we say 100 damage, you go from 130, because you already got the Unholy Might from the last node, to 190, right? Is that good? Well, there have to be way more payoffs for you to be mana-based. So I would say if you go for this, this is not the crazy payoff you're looking for mostly. It's more like, oh, Stormweaver got nerfed so hard that I still need a home for my mana-based build because it's still viable. So maybe I go Lich instead, and maybe you can do something with the Unholy Might there and with the extra damage. That is being said about self-cast builds. When it comes to minion builds, I'm sure this is a lot different. One neat thing that DM told me actually the other day was there is a support that converts all added damage to cold, which would mean that this could be worth it, right? Maybe you can even go Archmage and Blackened Heart with Unholy Might scaling. We'll have to see how good Stormweaver is, but that sounds interesting. You would basically convert all the added damage into cold. However, that's a support gem, so you can only have it on one skill. So that would also mean that all your damage would have to come from one skill. So my conclusion for Lich is basically this. Aside of stuff like Blackened Heart and Eternal Life, which could turn out to be extremely strong build arounds, there is also just the fact that this Ascendancy is generically good, which I really say rarely about PoE2 Ascendancies. So let's say Eternal Life sucks for some reason, and let's say we can't make Blackened Heart work. What do you have for a normal Chaos caster or anything like that, right? You would get 30% more damage from Eldritch Empowerment. I'm gonna assume you can figure that somehow out. You get 30% more damage from Necromantic Conduit if you can figure this downside out. You would get your mana completely solved with Soulless form right here, and then you would get +2 jewels, with one of them basically being a copy from your best, with Crystalline Phylactery. And that is the bare bones of what this Ascendancy does. And sure, you have to cope with some of these downsides, right? I'm sure there's going to be more to it if you look at it. But what I'm trying to say is, even at its core, if nothing you want to do, like nothing fancy, will work out, this is still, it has a very nice fallback plan. Like, they don't just give out these 30% more damage multipliers on most Ascendancies. They don't really give you stuff like this for endgame. I think, like, solving mana is just probably the easiest way I've ever seen, other than something like Infernalist. So, in total, I absolutely love this Ascendancy. It's the kind of design where I would say, like, it is generically powerful if you wanted to, not crazy, but, like, solid. And then if you can figure out some of the more complex ways to scale it, then it's going to be pretty bonkers. So what else would you want from an Ascendancy? I'm not really sure, but this is by far my most favorite ones in terms of design so far. But yeah, that's about all I got to say. What do you think about Lich? Put it down in the comments. Am I overhyping it? Am I underhyping it? Am I not giving it enough credit or too much? I really like this Ascendancy. I like the style. I like how the nodes are designed. Everything kind of makes sense, which some of the other Ascendancies are maybe a little bit more whack. Great job. I don't know what else to say. Hope the patch notes come out tomorrow. Then I'm gonna be doing a video ASAP. Really can't wait to get my hands on it, and then we know a lot more concrete stuff. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.